Hi, I'm Rodi Srivastava,
I'm Anuradha Nagraj.
and this is The Migration Story.
She said earlier, if you were to speak to me, I would hesitate in saying my name. But today I can come forward and say my name with confidence. And I said, why is that? And she said that, today I have a bank account. In Uttarakhand, people say that there's a local saying that the rain would stop once the soil saturates with water. But now that no longer happens. Oh, your crop has failed, so what do you do? So they would say, oh, we have to endure it. They don't even know that they could have the option of reaching out to the
Hello,
government.
everyone who is listening or watching. I'm speaking with Himani here, who is a researcher on climate adaptation and migration and a whole range of fascinating things. And she is currently at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. Hello, Himani. It is lovely to see you. So, thank you for speaking with us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Himani Upadhyay. I'm very happy to be here and share my experiences.
Perhaps we could start just with a little introduction from yourself and maybe talk about how you got interested in this research.
I largely work on a number of topics under the broad umbrella of climate adaptation, and the linkages between climate change and migration is one of them. And well, I started my journey as a researcher back in 2009, where I had this very formidable opportunity to be at the dawn of climate policy making in India. So I worked with a number of state governments in India who were preparing their climate action plan, on their state action plan on climate change. When we were, interviewing affected populations, largely people who are dependent on natural resources such as fishing communities, farmers, etc., the topic of migration often came up in the context of rural livelihoods. There started the interest in this topic, and thereafter I remember that President Nasheed, who was the former president of Maldives, did this underwater conference, sort of highlighting to the world that how vulnerable his country is and their population is, and sort of saying the famous things like please come before we sink, stuff like that.
And we want to see that everyone else is also occupied as much as we are, and would like to see that people actually do something about it.
Which really then became sort of very popular and sparked this conversation about climate migration, and they're going to be like mass movement of populations.
If Maldives cannot be saved today, we do not feel that there is much of a chance for the rest of the world.
Well, I remember that meeting being conducted underwater as well with the Maldives. I think it was sprawled all over the news. And another interesting angle is I love to scuba dive myself and have seen upfront in certain ways what coral bleaching looks like. What I find very compelling in terms of what you're describing is that you have covered such a range of things, right? Like, so drylands to I saw your work on the Himalayan region to now oceans and communities who live proximate to the ocean. So I suppose my first question to you would be on climate impacts. So this is a very large question, a very large country and region, but to whatever extent you can generalize what you're seeing, where you see the climate impact or the type of climate impact and how it's affecting different migration patterns. Can you maybe just give us some examples from slightly different contexts that you've seen?
So the linkages between, say, climate change and migration are not so simple. They're extremely complex, and they are not so causal and linear as often presented as. First of all, my first outlook when researching any region is to see what role does migration play in that society. So migration or movement of people has a historic, people have been migrating for all sorts of reasons. So I can give you an example, say the state of Uttarakhand. So migration is a historic and a cultural phenomena there. People have been out migrating from villages to earn a better income, to find employment, for better opportunities for time immemorial. So it's a very much a very strong part of their social and cultural fabric. Now, in the recent, say, 20 years, where climate change has become really important. So, Uttarakhand is a state where almost 70% of the population depends upon subsistence based agriculture. So, they rely on monsoon rains and agriculture for their, say, livelihood. So, for this region specifically, climate change has an important role to play. Where you find that people are observing the changes in their crops, in their crop productivity.
ये खेती का भी सब चीज़ चेंज हो रहा है। खेती से पहले हम जो है जब पर्यावरण चेंज हो रहा है तो इसके साथ साथ हमने सारी खेती चेंज कर दी है, जैसे टमाटर कर दिया, मटर कर दिया, सेब कर दिया। सेब में भी आज से पहले 20 साल पहले दूसरी वैरायटी
As to how the rain patterns are changing, people will often tell you that earlier used to rain very periodically. Now it rains a lot. Like there are heavy precipitation events. It will rain a lot in one day, and then there will be a dry period. The fact that winter rains have reduced, there is no longer snow. So all these things have a cumulative impact on, say, agriculture. You will find in Uttarakhand the fact that they rely on mountain water springs for their drinking water needs. Not every village is connecting to a proper water pipeline, and these are really running dry. One more thing that I observed in Uttarakhand was the seed banks were diminishing. So the seeds that they used to grow, say hardy varieties, maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago, they are no longer able to grow that because their productivity has gone down. The fact that people are out migrating, so there's no longer labor to do that kind of intensive cropping. So, in terms of climate change impacts, these are certain things that are happening in Uttarakhand. Now, with respect to migration, so Uttarakhand is sort of a, I would say like a state which is going through sort of a social experiment. So, for a researcher like me who was interested in two things like climate change and migration, it was sort of like a social situation where I could go in and explore. So there were communities who were experiencing these impacts. At the same time, there was really high out migration, which was leading to depopulation of villages. So Uttarakhand became a state in the year 2000. And it is interesting to note that this was after a really long agitation by the local population demanding a separate state for the mountain people to represent their political priorities, their development priorities, and demanding a separate state for the mountain people, and the very same mountain people started to outmigrate. This Between the year, I think 2010 to say 2017, when this was really happening, there was not really an assessment of what was going on. In the year 2017 or 18, the government of Uttarakhand set up the Rural Development and Migration Commission to basically assess that what's going on in our villages, why are people leaving? And they found out like a number of reasons why they were leaving, that there were not enough employment opportunities, there were lack of infrastructure, there was crop depredation, and climate really did not come up as a reason, but it was sort of trickling down or cascading into all these reasons that were happening. So when I went into the field to inquire that you know what about changes in the climate? What has changed? So I asked the question, what has changed in your village in the last 10 years? So with the two things, that people have left and our crops are not doing so well. We are unable to have the storage of food grains that we had before. So this is the case with Uttarakhand.
I think it's a very particular sort of case. It has its own particularities, right? Like, so when you talk to someone, if they're not using the language of climate, say it's a low wage worker somewhere, how are they describing what is going on? So obviously, what someone experiences in terms of a climate impact can vary drastically depending on where you are, where you're located, and probably also your positionality in society and all of that that dictates how you get impacted. So I suppose my larger question to you is this: how do people describe it, and what do they say?
So the vocabulary of climate change can be very scientific. Most people when especially when you're interviewing affected populations, they don't really know the word climate change. So our attempt is to basically ask them questions about their everyday life. So supposing I'm interviewing a person in the Himalayas, Then I would ask them that what has changed in your village in the last 10 years? How has been the rainfall? Have there been any changes in your, say, agricultural produce? Have there been any changes in the fodder availability that is there? Have you noticed any changes in the seeds? So there are different markers for understanding, and then eventually one would, bring up that have you had any information about climate change impacts? Because see, in India, climate policy is very decentralized, right? Every government takes on actions based on their local priorities. So there's something happening with respect to addressing climate impacts at the local level as well. So, in case they have heard about, say, supposing there is a crop failure and there is a crop insurance scheme that they are a part of or that can compensate them for their crop failure, are they aware of such things? So, our attempt in doing a survey or interviews is to not really throw the language of climate change as science, but to really understand it from their everyday life. And it often comes up relatively very quickly. People are often, they very quickly say that, oh, I had 20 sacks of potatoes I could grow, but now I can only grow, the productivity is only this much. Or they would say that rains were something very different. In Uttarakhand, people say that there's a local saying that the rain would stop once the soil saturates with water, but now that no longer happens. Or they would just go into their, very endemic or very generational knowledge about their livelihoods, about how they understand the ecosystem that they are in, or they understand the livelihoods that they are a part of, and how things are changing. So that gives you a very good understanding, or gives you at least a entry into this whole domain. Similarly, I can tell you for when we were interviewing people in the island communities, you mentioned corals. So corals are sort of the feeding ground for tuna fish. Now, if the corals bleach out, they are the feeding ground for fish on which the tuna comes and feeds. Now, if the coral is bleaching, then those fish, the small ones on which the tuna come, they are no longer there. So they can immediately say that there's something happening in the ocean where the corals are bleaching, and it's affecting our tuna catch. Or they would say, they would have examples from their everyday life that the prices of food and vegetables in island communities, often food and vegetables especially come from mainland India. They are unable to grow because of salt in the soil. So they would give examples like, now the price has gone up for so and so reason. So from their everyday life, there would be many examples that you could sort of catch on to, and then we would present that in your region temperatures have gone up by, say, this degree, and the impacts are this.
So as little as 1 degree above the average summer maximum temperature can cause a bleaching event if it lasts long enough. Generally, if we get to 6 to 8 degree heating weeks, we would start to get a fair amount of mortality. This summer, we've had 10 to 12 degree heating weeks across much of the Great Barrier Reef.
Say for Uttarakhand, I would say that, you are saying that there have been increased cloud bursts in your region. So what do you think? Why do you think this is happening? Then they would, open up and talk about it. So it's not like they are unaware, just that they don't speak in the same vocabulary as probably scientists do.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because I didn't know if there is a word in Hindi also for climate. I'm sure there must be.
There is Jalvayu Parivartan, you say.
Okay.
But it's still scientific, right? That Jalvayu
Yeah.
Parivartan, they would say ki yeah, but they would then get onto their own, supposing if they have local understanding of these terms, then they would come down to that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there must be a lot of so you mentioned this generational understanding. So that also was sort of a very compelling thought for me. So I'd be interested to hear because I've heard things here and there, and I think some of your work alludes to this as well, which is sort of looking at localized and grassroots oriented solutions towards some of these climate impacts that we're seeing. So obviously, again, these are all sweeping questions in a very, very complicated context, but Could you maybe even just give us one example where you were struck by a specific case where there's some kind of intergenerational knowledge or work with the local community which is being used to, or could be, it could even be a potential case?
I wouldn't say about intergenerational knowledge, but I can give you an example of an intervention that I saw in Uttarakhand. So while doing my research, I came across this project which is called Hilans, and it was a joint project between the government of Uttarakhand and IFAD. And what they were doing was that they were setting up agro processing centers in a small village in the district of Almora in the region called Hawalbag. And what they were doing was that they were employing women in those agro processing centers. And they offered such great flexibility to those women from the villages that they could finish the tasks that they were responsible for in their households and come to the center in their free time. And what they were doing, second good thing that was happening was that these women were responsible for collecting the extra vegetables or fruits that were there in different households in their village and bring it to this agro processing center. And their main task at the center was to produce, say, chutneys and jams and pickles out of the product that they collected. So the good thing, or the I would say the positive outcomes of this intervention was that it gave employment. It gave employment to women, and I interviewed those women there. And they, one of the women, it's so distinct in my memory as to how she said it. She said earlier, if you were to speak to me, I would hesitate in saying my name, but today I can come forward and say my name with confidence. And I said, why is that? And she said that, today I have a bank account. Never in my generational this thing have women had a bank account, and I can put my money there, and I'm very proud of what I'm doing. So this was something very striking for me that, and then while interviewing other people in that area, they said that even though this intervention is aimed at improving rural livelihoods or providing employment to rural people, one of the very positive outcomes is that it has controlled migration, because women are the backbone of not only agriculture but say the rural society in Uttarakhand. If they migrate, everything sort of stops or falls apart. So if women stay, then migration also gets controlled. So it had such a positive impact for controlling out migration in that region that I was, this is intervening in rural livelihoods and sort of providing that kind of an infrastructure opportunity to people there. It's a win-win on so many counts, not only migration, but perhaps they can now have access to information or education about crop insurance, animal insurance, about improving, using better varieties of seeds, about women would say, oh, I'm not the person of contact in my house to get information about certain things. But now she would say, oh yeah, I know whom to contact, where to get this information from. So the cascading effects of these are so many that it not only has implications on the economic front of a household, but on so many other counts. So for me, this was a very positive example to observe.
So basically, wherever women are doing well, it has positive implications, right?
Well, this was a place where women were at the center of
the intervention.
Yeah, I was struck by this example on many counts, because if you are familiar with the literature on gender, climate, and migration, you will find that women are either discussed as victims or as victors. But there is a missing perspective that comes from a local context, where it's not about victims or victors, but to me, it's about more than that. It's not just framing women as this or that, but perhaps going into the underlying conditions that they live in, the opportunities that are available to them.
Oh, I completely agree. It feels like a very unidimensional, right?
Yeah.
It feels like you're painting someone as either this or that, and it's sort of a kind of false binary in it. And this is not to say that exploitation does not occur and all of that. All of that is extremely true.
The words construction work probably conjure in your mind workers standing on the scaffoldings of tall buildings or carrying heavy bricks at a construction site. But in reality, the nature of construction work is far more diverse than we actually think. Now, the construction sector in India employs a whopping 71 million workers of different types. Hello and welcome to L is for Labour, your source of information for all things labour.
Only on the migrationstory.com.
I noticed that in some of your work, your research is actually exploring sort of two veins of something where you're also looking very much at the population that stays behind. So you mentioned that migration is actually like very nuanced, which I agree with. So you said that it can sometimes have pros, it can sometimes have cons, and it also impacts the staying population. So could you give us one example and what they felt about migration?
So yeah, in Uttarakhand, the regions or the villages that are having complete depopulation are popularly called as ghost villages, and where the population count has been zero. Now, when it comes to staying populations, I there is often sort of a they are not so well represented in science, in research, in policy. And from the case of Uttarakhand, I feel that they are the populations who are strongly impacted by migration and climate. So, if we were to sort of approach this by saying that there is climate change impacts, and migration is one of the sort of a response to those climate impacts, that certain things are happening at the rural level, at the rural livelihood level, and people seek people feel that migration could be an option for them to respond to the risk of climate change. So those people have migrated, right? Now there are certain populations who don't want to leave, or those who cannot leave. So either it's by choice or the lack of choice. So these are the staying populations. Now, in Uttarakhand, these staying populations are again faced with this sort of the twin impacts of people having left their villages. At the same time, agriculture, rural livelihoods becoming even more difficult, more complicated. So in Uttarakhand, agriculture is done as family labor. People from the family work on the farms. Now, if you don't have people in your family or in a community, like in one of the interviews that I did, someone said that the village only functions if there are people in the village. If slowly people leave, what happens is that you have terrace farming. I have my terrace here, you have here, somebody has here. So we all, as a community, try to grow the same crops. Now, if this is abandoned, this is fallow, I'm growing something here, then I am sort of being attacked by, say, pests, by, say, animals, because we have sort of disrupted the balance that we had before. So it becomes very difficult for that person who's cropping to have a good outcome. Secondly, then there is impacts of, say, precipitation, having cloud burst, having very strong temperatures, which they have to deal with. On another count, from a migration perspective, imagine a situation where you have a school or a primary healthcare center in the village, which was fully functional, say, 5 years back. Now, slowly people have gone. School has perhaps one teacher, two teachers have left. Primary healthcare center, which was functional, is also sort of debilitating now. Now the government thinks that only 6 children are coming to the school. So why do we need a school? So there is gradual withdrawal of these public services. Now a woman I saw who was probably in her 80s, she was being carried in a palanquin, which was so surprising for me that she was being carried by four people through a non-motorized path for 2 hours, then again had to undertake a journey for 4 hours to reach a credible or so find some support for her medical needs. These things sort of they have such great impact on staying populations because they are not only being impacted at, say, their livelihood level, but also there is such a withdrawal of the basic services that they need, which were available to them before. So for me, staying populations are extremely vulnerable and need to be more discussed and more documented. And perhaps there should be more discussion about how policy can really support them.
No, thank you so much for that. Like, I think on the subject now of migration, though, because as you said, it has its pros and cons, right? Like, so aren't there some benefits of migration as well, such as remittances and stuff? So that's
Sure.
the
So on the positive side, you're absolutely right that migration has great benefits like remittances. And Uttarakhand is known as a money order economy till the time money orders could be done. That every household that had an out migrant would receive money orders to take care of their daily needs. And if you go into the statistics, you'll find that people use remittances for organizing their everyday life, to buy clothes, to pay for the education of a child, to buy food, etc. These basic things. There are so many other positive outcomes. It gives you opportunities outside of agriculture. It helps you inculcate skills outside of agriculture, with mobile phones, with internet. The outside world, which was sort of a mystery to the people living in remote villages, are now easily accessible. So when people out migrate, they bring in new information about different things in agriculture itself, or they bring in social networks, which are really important in the whole migration scene. So there are many positives of migration as well. Gives you opportunity to study outside, gives you opportunity to find employment, etc. I mean, from the climate context, what has been sort of demystified is that if you see any research or writing from early 2000, you would see that there was this narrative that there would be climate refugees from the global south to the global north, and how then it was, transformed into a national security issue, especially from countries like the US, that this is a security concern for us, and they made it like an agenda on their national security debate. However, over the period of time, we have had a number of reports and research. If you look at the World Bank report, the Groundswell report on internal migration, it clearly says that most of the migration in respect of climate is internal. And we need to sort of support, we need to have safe and orderly migration. So this idea that there's going to be fleeting number of people moving cross borders from one country to another, and we'll have to take care of them, etc., is really doesn't hold, cannot be supported by any scientific evidence. And there are certain papers, scientific papers, I can give you an example from Germany, where a number of people were interviewed in Germany, asking that, if people were migrating due to climate impacts, what would they think about it? An overwhelming number of people who were interviewed said that we would really want to help them out and, support them. So this is something that comes largely from these alarmist narratives really come from the media. I would say that in science, this has been refuted long time ago. And as far as perceptions of migrant goes, I think it depends on how the society evolves and how do they really, what kind of narratives are built around them, and what kind of information do they receive, and how they really understand this topic, that it's, for some people, it might be a matter of survival. They just have to move. So in that situation, what can they do? And yeah, time will tell that what happens in that context. But to me, this is highly politicized and alarmist. So
No, I completely agree with you. So that was what I was trying to understand from your perspective as well. Because it seems like there are just, it's sort of sometimes like no win-win situation, right? Like, and we just have a lot of work to do from the policy perspective in so many different ways. So I'm interested to understand, did you see any demographic patterns, for example, in Uttarakhand, or any gender-based stuff in terms of who's emigrating? That's the first question. And then the second one is, I mean, basically what you think we should be doing from a policy perspective. Yeah.
So demographic patterns, if you look at the first report that was brought out by the Rural Development and Migration Commission in the state of Uttarakhand, it shows that younger people are on the move. Mostly people, if I'm not correct, between the age of 25 to 40, they form the larger bracket, almost 42% of people who are on the move. So younger people are migrating. With respect to men and women, this is very interesting. If you look at the data, then you'll often find that women are migrating more. That is because, according to the definition that is used for migration, is that what was your last place of residence. So if women are married, they often, there is a sort of, they say that, this is my new place of, so it gets counted as migration. Other than that, even when I was in Uttarakhand, I could hardly find any young people in the villages. They were mostly elderly people. And for me, that is really concerning because elderly people, they really need support on so many levels. Not only are they vulnerable to climate impacts, but they are simply vulnerable to so many demands of our older life, right? Often you would find that people are living just there's only one person in a family or in a household, and because most of the other family members have out migrated, and they are unable to say work on the farm or take care of animals, so their dependency on the everyday life is quite high on others. Yeah, demographically I could say that these populations are affected on so many levels. One is climate change, one is migration, one is just the fact that we are going through times where different kind of crises are increasing. So what policy can do, I mean, I can speak for climate and say migration. From a climate perspective, I think it is very important to have a participative approach where you sort of include these communities in any sort of intervention that is being planned. From a migration perspective, I would say that migration is very contextual. So, to understand that what are the contextual factors that influence migration, or say demographically, who is moving, who's not moving, why, like to understand why is this happening, why are people moving, why are they not moving, what kind of support do they need. In a country like India, where portability of social security schemes is they're still not portable. If you move from one part of the country to another, you cannot use your ration card. It's very challenging for a migrant to sort of have this change of address and go through this whole administrative process so that they become eligible for public distribution schemes, etc. So things, very simple, basic things that policy can do. Another thing from a climate and migration perspective would be to have a discussion. So my understanding is that climate and migration is such a cross-cutting issue that often it sits in silos. So you would have a lot of information on migration, and you would also have a lot of information on climate impacts in a state at a state level. But these two do often don't come together in any policy or plan. So unless you have policymakers talking about this topic from a more where they come together, there is no real what to say. You cannot really go from step A to step B. So perhaps having these discussions, like just raising awareness or doing training or workshops about these topics, could be one. And supporting migrants, like upskilling. So if women are on the move or anybody who's on the move, upskilling them so that they are able to find opportunities in their destination areas. Supporting them with things that policy can do, such as portability of social security schemes. This is one. And from a climate perspective, I already mentioned that, including them in any intervention that is happening, and really investing in capacity building. Like, a regular person from a village should know what are the different steps if I want to avail, say, crop insurance, or if I want information about this. How should I go about it? And because often people would tell me that I would ask that, oh, your crop has failed, so what do you do? So they would say, oh, we have to endure it. They don't even know that they could have the option of, reaching out to the government, to a certain public institution and seek help. So that awareness should be there, that, oh yes, I can seek help on this topic.
That is so striking, right? Like, the even when solutions exist, part of the puzzle also typically entails also awareness drives and working with people so that they know that certain options are available to them. Okay, so
Absolutely.
the last thing I will say is, please add something if you feel like we've missed discussing anything that you would have liked to highlight. And in addition to that, if you have any favorite, it could also be fiction, book, movie, TV show, it doesn't have to be new, that you have watched, which actually you felt, well, I don't know, you felt struck by something in terms of how it described climate change or how it described climate change and migration.
I don't have a very spontaneous answer to that, but I do remember that when I was doing my field research in Uttarakhand, I came across a documentary which was on ghost villages. I don't really remember the title of it, but I do remember that I did a screening of this at my institute just to sort of better understand that what is this phenomena of ghost villages and why are people leaving, and how do people really, in a village where there's only one person, what do they really do? There were questions of the fact that, if that person dies, who's going to, do the last rites, things like that. I don't really remember, but I think it is, I'm going to find that out and send it across. But yeah, I wish I could remember the title of that documentary, but it was really something that I found to be quite interesting.
So please, yes, do share the link, and we'll try and add it to the bottom of the screen whenever we put this out. So please do send it across if you remember it. But yeah, I was saddened to hear it, because it brought to my mind also this image of sort of people alone and feeling isolated. So I mean, clearly there's a lot we have to do at the policy level for vulnerable populations, both who are staying and also those who are migrating, since they are facing climate impacts, and for other reasons like employment.
Absolutely. You said that if there's something that comes to my mind, I think our that mental health of people who are staying is a real concern, especially the fact that you mentioned isolation is a real concern for people who have lived with family for generations, not only as a nuclear family, but often as joint families and in a big bustling village. For them to suddenly live all by themselves is something that really, when you meet them, then they would just simply hold your hand and say, "Why don't you stay with me? You remind me of so and so. I'm so happy that I could talk to someone today." So these are some real concerns or I wouldn't say challenges, but this is the reality of people who are living in these villages who are very few in numbers. So yeah, mental health of people who are affected by these impacts is something that I would like to explore further.
Thank you so much, Himani. I have taken more of your time than I thought I would. So I appreciate you speaking with us. Please keep us posted on your different research on this subject, and I'll be sure to follow you as well. And yeah, it's wonderful to connect, and thank you for speaking with us.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for this opportunity and to have this lively discussion. Yeah, I'll also follow Migration Story around because you guys are doing some wonderful and very important work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Check out our website www.themigrationstory.com for more content. You can subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify. The audio editing and sound design is by Akshay Ramuhalli. Stay tuned for more stories on migration.
Hi, I'm Rodi Srivastava,
I'm Anuradha Nagraj.
and this is The Migration Story.